I know that you are a historian, but you are also a member of the parliament.
Yeah.
Which identity you like better?
Yes, actually, for this interview, I'd like to be interviewed as a historian rather than a member of parliament, because it has a different consequence, As a historian, you just, I only have an academical responsibility to stay about the historical fact. But as a member of parliament, it's all about policy. It can slightly misinterpreted by people who.
It's more complicated.
Yeah, it's more complicated. That's why as a politician, so I would like, to be interviewed as a historian. But of course, if you want to mention, to mention my title, you can say that I also a member of parliament.
How long have you been a historian?
As a historian, of course, since I graduated from university, I was graduated from Diponegoro State University in Semarang, Central Java in 2003. And from that moment on, I became so to speak, a public historian. I don't teach at university, but for the last 3 years, I'm a guest lecturer at Rainward Academy. That is that's University of Art in Amsterdam, where I teach museum studies and also about post-colonial studies, especially related to museum topics. Because I'm also the secretary, former, no longer secretary. I'm a secretary of Indonesian restitution team. That the main job of this team is to return the historical artifact from the Netherlands to Indonesia.
Speaking of the returning the artifacts from Netherlands to Indonesia, I know that there is a very famous bone, the Java man.
The fossils.
The fossils. The Java man. So, can you tell us about the stories about the Java man?
Well, actually, it has been requested before in 1951 by Muhammad Yamin. Muhammad Yamin, he was a member of parliament at the time when he spoke up about the importance of returning this object from the Netherlands. But he's also a historian, right? Same with me. And in 1951, so 2 years after the Roundtable Conference in The Hague, in the Netherlands, he urged the Netherlands government to return the object. One of the objects that he requests was the fossil of Java man, or Pithecanthropus erectus. He said that it was very important to return this object because this object is the evidence to prove that actually Java Island is an old civilization. So this is the evidence. That's why he said he urged the Netherlands government to return this object. But his effort to return this object was never happened until in 1970, when Suharto, the second president of Indonesia, visited the Netherlands, and then he received some of the object that was taken by the Dutch during colonial era. And then afterward, in 1978, there were more objects being returned by the Netherlands. And then in 2021, Minister of Education and Culture decided to establish a special team, which is I became the secretary, to return more object from the Netherlands. But that makes our job difference from before is that we don't want to return the object as it is, but we also want to produce the knowledge from the object that we return. That's the difference. So we want to return the object, and also we want to produce knowledge, because knowledge is most important things for the young generation to learn about the past.
So the fossil of Java man is now in Indonesia.
Still, no, the fossil. Actually, we request some the object. The first request we asked the Netherlands government to return eight object, because if we ask the Netherlands to return the object, it doesn't mean only one object. It could be more. It could be group of objects. So we have requested the Java man as well, and then also the group of object from it was an artwork. It is an artwork from Balinese modern art, Pitamaha, which is actually already returned, together with Lombok and Bali jewelries that was taken during the war, in colonial war, I mean. But the Pithecanthropus erectus now still being kept by Naturalis. It is a biodiversity center in Leiden. So I think it is still in the process to return to Indonesia.
Do you have to pay them to get them back?
Because based on the agreement between the two governments, all the objects that return to Indonesia will be, the Netherlands government will take part to pay all the costs expenses, to pay all the expenses that comes from this returning process.
So the fossil of Java man, the Java man lived how many years ago on the island?
1,000 years ago, even more million.
Yeah. What's the earliest record of history of Indonesia?
Pardon?
The earliest written record, or
the earliest.
Who is the ancestors of Indonesia?
Well, it is not easy to explain who is our ancestor, but according to one of the theory, it tells that based on out of Africa, for instance, our ancestor, it is very diverse, not only one. First from Yunnan. For instance, from Yunnan, well, Indonesian spellings or pronounce it Yunnan. I don't know what in Chinese.
It's also Yunnan.
Yunnan, right?
Yunnan, yeah.
That's based on what you call it, the old history or the prehistory.
Yeah, prehistory.
From Yunnan. But also we have like in Papua, of course, is different from those who coming from Yunnan. That's our ancestor. Because Indonesia is an archipelago. It is a crossing path. It's a crossing. So many people coming from many places here. The crossing. They met here, and then we.
So in China, we say that China has a history of 5,000 years, or to be exactly, maybe 3,700 years. Egypt has a history of 8,000 years. The other old civilization include India and maybe Mesopotamia. How old is Indonesia in general?
Well, as a crossing point, right? So I couldn't say that our civilization is more older than others. But for me as a historian, yes, it is very important to to show that the civilization ever lived here.
Yeah.
But for me, it is also important thing to see and then how we give the meaning into the civilization we have. For instance, Muhammad Yamin he was asking the fossils to prove that actually the Java Island was not the empty place, because you have to relate this argument that Indonesia colonized by the Dutch.
Yeah.
So it is like a political statement to say, come on, we are not live in the empty island. The civilization already here since 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So when the Westerners, in this respect, the Dutch coming here, this island were not empty place. So, this argument sometimes intertwined. One side in the other, in one hand, to tell and to prove that actually we already live here from 1,000 years ago. And in other hand, we want to say, because that was a post-war era, we want to say we are actually a freedom country way before the colonizer came to our country.
Yeah.
So something, sometimes it is like, intertwined between whether you want to prove that we are a very, old civilization, and also it become our part, or it become our identity as a nation, as a new nation that, normally we want to take all history as, as a historical legitimacy for us to against the colonialism.
What was life like before the Dutch people came to Indonesia?
Well, way before the Dutch, as a colonizer, came to Indonesia, well, of course, there was no Indonesia, the name,
Yeah.
It was an archipelago, consists of many kingdoms and sultanate, from Sumatra to Sulawesi, from Java to Lombok. I think maybe more than 100 of kingdoms, until the Westerner, in this respect the Dutch, coming. They want to buy something, spices. They did the trade to the local ruler, and then step by step it become colonization.
So all the kingdoms, over 100 kingdoms, what languages do they speak? Language. What language do they use? And words, written words. Of course, it's not the Bahasa Indonesia like now, right?
Well, we have more than 200 local language, including dialect, right?
Can they understand each other?
Well, they have a lingua franca. They have a connecting language. That's what we call as a Malay.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But since early 20th century, the language transformed into our language, that what we call as a Bahasa Indonesia, or Indonesian language. That was since 1928, when the youth political activists were gathering, and they have they organize a meeting, so to speak, and then they have a youth oath.
Then they decided
to use
that
Bahasa Indonesia as our national language.
But before the colonization, on this Java island, do you know how many kingdoms are there? Was there
many of them? I think. For instance, I was born in Banten, that the western part of Java. That's a new.
There was a king, very famous king, Banten.
Sultanate of Banten, right? And then in Central Java, there are a lot of kingdom as well, and also in the East Java. In total in Java, of course, I think more than, I don't know, maybe 20 could be.
The interesting part about history is that before the modern history in China, there was also many kingdoms here and there, right? But there always will
Fight.
be one. Yeah, they fight each other, and there will always be one emerging as the most powerful country, and he will conquer kingdoms, the most powerful kingdoms, and he will conquer, defeat all the opponents, and unite, try to unify the country. Was this ever happened in
Yes,
Indonesia?
of course, we have a two kingdom. First, Majapahit. They conquer some part of Indonesia, even until the southern part of Philippines. And also we have a Sriwijaya, who also has a connection with China. You know, when we visited Muara Jambi, there was evidence.
Yeah.
You know how they have a relation with China and also with India in Nalanda, right? For spreading Buddhism.
Yeah.
Right? That's two kingdom were I think the biggest in number of the area that they rule. Like Majapahit, they're also very vast, in terms of their conquest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Majapahit, and then after that, the Islam coming to Indonesia, and they spread the influence of Islam, and then there was a shifting of power, right, from old Hindu or Buddha kingdom to Islam sultanate.
What's Bali's connection to Indonesia before
Bali?
the modern history? Yeah, Bali was a separate island, right?
Yeah.
It was separated by sea, and they believe in Hinduism. Mm-hmm. How did Bali become part of Indonesia?
Because people of Bali or Balinese are believed that they are the descendant of Majapahit kingdom.
Oh.
Right. So when Majapahit slowly, becoming decreasing in terms of the influence and power. So Bali was was an island for the Majapahit people, and also of course those who come from the kingdom. They went to Bali, and then they start a new life, and then they have a lot of kingdom
He's from Bali.
Yeah.
But he practiced Hinduism.
Yes.
Yeah, why Islam didn't influence Bali? Because most of the Indonesian people believe in Islam, right? But in Bali, it's mainly Hinduism.
Well, I don't know. I don't really, I don't really knowledgeable about that part of history. But Bali also very interesting in Indonesian history because, under Dutch colonial, Bali, well known as one of, there are so many struggle against the colonialism, especially in the early 20th century. They have they against Dutch colonization, and they, we can assume that they are very heroic, when they against the Dutch colonialism, and then during revolution, after Indonesia gained its independence in 1945, they are also very, very high motivated to get rid of Dutch colonialism. So as a part of Indonesian history, Bali is very unique because they are practice Hinduism, but they also have strongly motivation to get rid of Dutch colonialism. Because sometimes people say, okay, in other part of Indonesia, mostly people are Muslim, they against the Dutch. But yes, we also have a Bali. Most of the people are practicing Hindu, but they against the Dutch colonialism.
So the Dutch people, how many islands do they control of Indonesia? Because Indonesia has so many islands, especially the large 5 islands.
Well, actually, there are 2 versions about it. First, say that the Dutch has been, colonized Indonesia for more than 300 years. To be precisely 350 years. But there is also a version based on the book written by Racing. Racing is a Dutch historian. He said that actually the Dutch didn't colonize Indonesia totally 350 years because they colonized Indonesia or Nusantara archipelago step by step, not in the same time. For instance, people in Aceh, Sultanate of Aceh, they fought against the Dutch colonization, and the Dutch succeed to control this area in 1904, until 1914. So if you count from 1914, let's say, to 1945, it's less than, way less than 300 years.
30 years.
So also in Bali, if we, if we take a war in Bandung Kingdom, or a war in Kelungkung Kingdom, the Dutch, colonized this area since 1906 and in 1908. So if we want to count how many years the Dutch has been colonized Bali, I think it is also less than 300 years, because they was defeated by the Dutch as a colonizer, of course, as a colonizer, started from 1908, right? So it's different. It's not completely colonized by the Dutch in 350 years, but that is very legal, very legal perspective way of seeing the colonization. But for me, it is also important to comprehend that colonization or colonialism is not about when you start to occupy certain island or certain group of people. It very complex structure. It's very complex system.
So it can be called semi-colonization, right?
Well, I don't agree with that. There is no semi-colonization or semi-freedom. No, I think we have to be decisive, to see the historical fact.
So the Dutch people mainly live on the Java Island.
Yeah.
So then, But they colonized Indonesia for about 300 years. There, in history, British people also colonized Indonesia for a short period of time, right? British.
The British, but because if we talking about the history of colonialism, there was also conflict between the colonizer. For instance, one of the islands in the east of Indonesia, the Rune Island, was swapped with Manhattan, because at that time Manhattan was under the Dutch colonization in America, in New York, right? Meanwhile, Rune Island was under the British, so they swapped the island. So the Dutch got the Rune Island because Dutch want to dominate the spices, especially the nutmeg trade in East Indonesia, in Maluku. Meanwhile, the British want to take control in Manhattan, right? So they swap, and it based on the Treaty Breda. Yeah. So that is what I mean with colonialism. You can see they can swap, they can take the island as if they are the owner of the land. Yeah. So it's very complex because it is related to the global history and how colonialism how they ran the colonialism, and then there are also conflict between them. Meanwhile, people in Indonesia, or people in Nusantara archipelago were never ever been involved, or even asking them to what would you like to do? Can we take your island? So that's colonialism. Colonialism, like they can do anything to the island as if it is an empty place, which is actually totally which is wrong.
What's the influence of the Dutch people? They never forced Indonesian people to speak their language.
Pardon? They never fought?
They never forced Indonesian people during the colonialism to speak their language, right?
That's a different case. After the Dutch succeed to rule most of the island in Indonesia, of course they have influence, and then what they did first is to abolish the power from local kingdom. And then since Dendel's era, that was in the early of 19th century, they integrated the sultanate and then also the kingdom into bureaucracy, colonial bureaucracy. So as a royal family, you don't have a salary, right? So you got tax from people. You have a privilege to collect tax from people. That's where that's what you call it. That's the way you make a living as a member of a royal family, as feudalism, right? But after Daedalus, some of the big kingdom were destroyed, so to speak, and then they were integrated into the colonial bureaucracy, and they get salary from the government. And then from that moment on, the Dutch colonial they create a two system of bureaucracy. First, the Dutch, of course, we have a governor general, like in Hong Kong, before they hand it back to
mainland
China. Mainland China, they have a governor general, which is white guy, and what you call it, the subordinate, right? The subordinate the mayor,
Yeah.
the resident, the assistant resident. That's a white bureaucracy line. But they also acknowledge the function of the elite traditional bureaucracy, like a bupati or the regency in regency. So they have a two line of bureaucracy to control the people in the colony. That's the way Dutch colonization working.
It's different from the British colonization and other European colonization, because if you take Malaysia or the Philippines as a case, as an example, most of the Malaysian people and the Philippines, they speak English.
Yeah.
Because the English people, the British force them to speak their language.
Let me continue my explanation.
Yeah.
So after they operate these two line of bureaucracy, they have the, so to speak, the Dutch line of bureaucracy power, and then also the local traditional elite, being the being the bupati, being the high, officer. They maintain this feudal class. They maintain this elite to keep the colonization, to keep colonize, the people. So they entertain this group of people, the elite. So they able to access the higher education. So in Indonesia, only a thin layer of society, which is elite, who spoke in Dutch fluently, because they can access higher education, which is actually using Dutch. Right? Meanwhile, people from the lower class, they couldn't speak Dutch, and they are the biggest chunk of society. Only a thin layer of society, which is very elite, right? Including my grandfather, for instance, my grandmother or my grandparent from my father's side, they spoke fluently in Dutch.
Oh.
Because their parents sent to Dutch school, but for the lower class, they were never able to access higher education unless only elementary school. That's why we, in Indonesia, only number of people who could speak Dutch fluently. Not many people, only elite.
Do you think it's a good way of controlling the country, or not a good way?
That's at the time, of course, during colonial era, that's the way Dutch running colonization in Indonesia. They maintain a thin layer of society, which consists of elite, from local elite, from feudal class, to control the whole area of colony, including the people, of course. But they didn't even care about the people in the lower class, because they sent a lot of people from lower class as a labor, even as a slave, to Suriname, right, and then to many islands in Indonesia. But in the elite, only small elite who control the island and people.
But it confuses me that during the 300 years time, it's a long period, the Dutch people never try to influence local people with
like in English, because the British and the Dutch has different style of colonizing people.
Yeah.
If you remember, British people, they have industrial revolution. which gave them opportunity to create a lot of things, very what you call it, technology, so to speak. So they need well-educated people to access their product, to get their product. How come you can use technology if you are not knowledgeable, if you are not a well-educated person, right? Meanwhile, the Netherlands is only tiny country, a small country in Western Europe. They're relatively poor compared to the England, to the British. What they want is only exploiting
the material, the source,
right? The resources. So they don't have any interest, to make their colony, the colonized people, as educated as the British did, to their colony.
That makes sense.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but the 300 years colonialism must have an impact on Indonesia, on people's
very much,
on people's character or way of living. What's that, do you think?
Well, in 1945, Sukarno, our first president, delivered a speech. He said, our first duty, after we liberate ourselves from the Dutch colonization from every country, right, from every nation, we have to build our national character, which is actually as opposite from the colonized people mentality, right? So you don't have to be inferior just because you are colored people in front of the white people, because we are born equal. And then when after Indonesia's independence in 1945, the population, we have a population 62 million people. 75 or even more than 75% of people were illiterate. I believe that also the result of the Dutch colonialism, because they only educate the higher class, the elite, or middle class and the elite, not the lower class. And the result is 75% and more people were illiterate. And then that's a problem of our independence. And Sukarno said we have to build our national character, mentality. It makes our nation different. We have to show to the world that we are a free country, we are no longer colonized people. So according to Sukarno, he wants to prove that we are equal. That's why, in 1955, there was a Asian African conference, which is actually, he want to organize a group of former colonized country and want to help the country, the nation that were still colonized by the Westerner.
Who proposed the idea of the Asia-Africa conference?
Well, actually, it has a long story, right? It started since 1920s, because many of Asian, I say Asian, not only Indonesian, Asian, like Chinese, Indian, Indonesian, they met in Europe as a student. Sun Yat-sen, for instance, he also presented the conference, one of the conference in Beerfield. I think that was in 1926. And then afterward, in 1927, there was also an anti-imperialism league in Brussels, where people from colored people from the colony were gathered in Brussels, including from China, India. And Nehru was there. Muhammad Hatta from Indonesia was there too. That conference was built, or making a strong bonding among them, and they keep maintain their relationship until in 1950s. Those who involved in this international activism start to invite some of the country in Asia and Africa to gathered in Bandung. So as I remember, Ali Sastro Amijoyo, and then also Sukarno. Then they call the old friend from to invite to come to Bandung to organize a conference to talk about the destiny of the new world, the new emergent country. Yeah.
Why in Bandung, not Jakarta or Bali?
I don't know. Maybe of course Bandung is a historical city. Bandung also is very important city in Indonesia, and Sukarno was also graduated from Bandung as one of the important leader in this movement.
Oh.
Yeah, he was graduate from Bandung Technic Hogeschool, that's in Dutch. University, Institute Bandung Technological Institute, right?
Yeah.
And he was graduate from there. So Bandung is very important city in our history. So I think that's one of the consideration why they decide to organize the conference in Bandung.
The conference has a special significance for Chinese people because of the Kashmir princess, the airplane. Yeah. The Kuomintang planted a bomb on the plane. The target was Zhou Enlai, but he was not on the plane.
And he flew the day after, right?
Yeah, the day after on another plane. But on that plane, 19 people, I think 6 were rescued, were saved. The other 13 were dead, including our Xinhua reporters, photographers, and bureau chiefs of Xinhua, several Xinhua, I think 3, at least 3 people.
Yeah, the plane was bombed, and of course it was it was shocking the committee of Asian African Congress. But luckily, Zhou Enlai, whether he knew or not, but very fortunate that he decided to flew the day after, right?
Yeah. I think they know. They received a tip about the assassination attempt, but they didn't know about the bomb.
Okay.
How to assassinate him? I think they didn't know.
So I think the Chinese intelligence already knew about the plan, but they never know how they will do it, right?
Yeah. Speaking of the Bandung Conference, China proposed the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. So I think it was also adopted in the
Bandung Principles.
Bandung Principles. This year also marks the 70th anniversary of Bandung Conference. So from a more official tone, what's the significance of Bandung Conference and the principles and all the Bandung spirit? how is it still relevant in today's world?
Well, of course, we are now living in the multipolar world, where now in the world there are so many blocks, not only two blocks. But back then in 1950s, after the war, after the Second War, the world been divided into two big blocks. We all know that. And then, as you know, as I know so far, then of course I learned about it. This conflict may bring the world into the into the
Chaos.
the chaos, of course, because it potentially will bring these two blocks into the nuclear war. Sukarno already aware about this issue, because the two countries, you know, the Eastern Bloc led by the Soviet Union, they also already, you know, create the nuclear bomb, as well as the United States with its ally. They also already created the bomb, and we know that Nagasaki, Hiroshima was bombed by atomic bomb by United States.
Yeah.
That's also one of the evidence. So it may bring to the third world, and that's make our leader, including your leader, including another leader from another Asian African countries, were concerned about this issue. So they are trying to make a peace, not only among of them, but also in the world. They're trying to make a peace with these two blocks. So to avoid the third world, the third world war. And then in between that issue, our leader, Sukarno, then also invite Nehru and other leader, say how if we, you know, organize a conference to reduce the intense political situation, international political situation. In this respect, the conflict between the two blocks, and then they also campaign to to liberate some of the countries which were still colonized by the Western country. So the bloc, well, back in 1950s, world has a two block, Eastern and Western, but also has another block, the colonized country, and then the colonizer country. So actually, four block: the communists, the capitalists, the colonized people or country, and the colonizer. So people like Sukarno want to overcome this problem. In one hand, he want to make a peace between the two big block, and in other hand, in second purpose is to liberate the country that still colonized by the colonizer. I think that is the explanation why they organize the Asia Africans conference in Bandung. But one of the principles from Chou Enlai that was adopted as a part of Bandung principle is the mutual respect, non-intervention, and then also peaceful coexistence, which is actually ideas of Nikita Khrushchev. Nikita Khrushchev is a Soviet leader, because They were also worried if the situation were escalated, will bring them to the Third World War.
Does, as a historian, do you think history repeats itself?
Well, I think history repeat itself is not exactly the event, not exactly the same historical event, but the pattern. The pattern of history could be repeated by those who doesn't learn history very well. But as a, as a law of nature, as a law of history, sometimes, it can be repeated, but only the pattern, not the exact historical event. War, for instance. War is we have war in the past. Now we have war in Ukraine and Russia. There's war.
Yeah.
What makes different war in the past and war now is the pattern, as well as how now we organize a new bloc in the world. It's the same. What make a lot of country come together is the interest. And then they make a deal among them, considering the world situation. So that was also happened in Bandung. So the pattern repeated, the pattern of history repeated, not the exact historical event.
Who is your favorite historic figure?
For me, may I say more than one?
Okay.
First, Sukarno, of course. 2, Mandela. And 3, Mao Zedong.
Do they have something in common, you think? You mentioned these 3 figures. They must have something in common.
They are a strong leader. For instance, Sukarno, Mandela, and Mao Zedong, they're very strong in leadership, and they know what they want, and they know how to liberate their people. I think that's the common commonalities, right? But of course, each historical figure has its own destiny, and their country also has their own destiny. Indonesia become, of course, we have a 5 principle, or we call it as a Pancasila as our guidance. So we call our democracy as democracy Pancasila, and then Mandela also has different, country as a result of his struggle. For instance, in Indonesia, after we, get our independence, not many Dutch will live here anymore. Meanwhile, in South Africa, they still have white people, well known as Afrikaner. They still live there.
Yeah.
In China, also different, destiny and different trajectory.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to learn.
There are 2 ways of saying that. One way of saying things that the common people decide the destiny of the history. The other way is the elite people, the elite group decide the history, decide the past. Yeah. Which one do you agree with?
Well, history is a human creation, so to speak. So, in certain point, men or people could decide where they want to go, right? For instance, of course, based on one of the historian from German said, Leopold van Ranke, history was made by elite, by hero, by a big person. That gives you impression that history made by the big figure, big historical figure. But if we refer to Karl Marx, well, we cannot change history as we want to, as we like, because it has to be changed by the working class people. So working class people has power to change the history. So Karl Marx is more, dialectical than the other. So if we refer to Leopold von Ranke, it's very elite way of seeing the history. The perspective is very elite. But from Karl Marx, it's a very, working people can change the history, can change the course of history by struggle, to get their right.
We also have a saying in Chinese is something like the times create the heroes, or the heroes create the times. It's
that's more Leopold van Ranke, right? That's more based on what the German historians say, Leopold von Ranke, that the elite. But I think the elite will never be succeed without the role of people, of course.
Yes.
I think it is a mixture of them can direct the course of history.
Oh, why did you decide to become a historian?
Why I did decide become a historian? Well, when I was still children, when I was still kids, my father always told me about the story of our family. So my father, I would consider him as a family historian who always share family history in the dining table. And he told us about the story of his parent, his uncle, and even his life. So it gives me the first impression that history, it ignite my imagination toward history, toward the past. And I become a history lover when my father brought me to the bookshop. And I still remember the book that I bought, when my father brought me to the bookshop. There was two books. First book about the Battle of Surabaya in 1945. And the second book, I thought it was a book about the tiger. And the title is a Tiger, written by Mohtar Lubis. But I didn't aware that this book actually novel. And I bought that book when I was still, I think, second grade of my elementary school, still a young boy. And when I read the book at home, I couldn't find any picture about the tiger, which was I want to see. Oh, it's a novel. I don't remember. I don't get it. I couldn't understand the book. So I only read the book about the Battle of Surabaya because it is like a comic book. I think that was my awareness about history was started at that time. So I became history lover, and I read a book. Then after I graduated from senior high school, I decided to enroll to Diponegoro University to history department. You know, where I become more expert in history. Yeah.
Which part of history do you study?
Well, colonial history until the Suharto era, so almost 100 years. That's my expertise.
Only about Indonesia or also about other countries?
Well, finally, you know, when I learned history of Indonesia, especially in the period of colonialism, it pushed me to learn other country history, because you cannot comprehend, you cannot understand the whole of the history without learning other country history that related into your topics, right? So my expertise is history of Dutch colonization in Indonesia. But how come you understand the Dutch colonization without comprehend the Dutch or the history of the Netherlands at the same period in Indonesia when the Dutch colonized Indonesia?
Is history a must-learn topic or major for Indonesia's children?
Yeah, of course. Indonesian students started to learn history in the middle school, but as a social science, not as a
social science.
Focus on history or not a special subject on history. It's part of social sciences. But when they in senior high school, they start learn history of Indonesia in, I think, in 11th grade in high school.
In China, I think at least for my times, from the night I was born in the 1990s, so children started to learn history. I think it's really early in junior high school. It's middle school.
Yeah, middle school, junior high school.
Yeah, middle school is just about history.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also in high school. And for people who studied liberal art or social sciences, history is a must-learn topic, and there's a test on, especially on history, on Chinese history, and the colonial time or the Second World War time is a very important topic because so people can remember. And I know that I don't know if it's accurate. So in Indonesia's history book, the colonizers like the Dutch or the Japanese, there's a chapter or stories about their colonization, but the history book doesn't tell people about like the massacres, the how many Japanese people massacred or killed at one place or a certain time. Is this right?
Not right at all, because we learn as well about forced labor, or Japanese called as a romusa. That's a forced labor. We learn about it. We learn about many casualties, many victims of the romusas or the forced labor. And the second, the sexual slave, or Ianfu.
Yeah.
We also learn about it. But we also learn that under Japanese era in Indonesia, that was when all the Dutch influence in many sectors, for instance in languages, Dutch administration, everything about Dutch were were banned by the Japan. So many historians are saying that the decolonization process of Indonesia was started in 1945, right? But this is my humble opinion, my own opinion. The colonization was started, especially in this respect, Dutch decolonization, was started when the Japanese occupied Indonesia. Because in 1942, that was the time when Japan get rid of the Dutch and their influence. The Dutch language was no longer diizinkan, allowed, was no longer allowed by the Japanese. So people who spoke in Dutch, and then Japanese can arrest them. And the second, they promote to use Indonesian language, Indonesia as a common language.
Oh.
Right. But of course, the honeymoon was occurred in the first years of their occupation, right?
Yeah.
And then afterward, yes, of course, as occupation or colonization as usual, there were also exploitation, and then also, of course, there were so many casualties, people were killed, executed, and then forced labor. So the price of, we have to pay the price of Japan occupation. But Sukarno, who decided to collaborate with the Japanese, he had his opinion. I mean, it's all about political business, right? When the Japanese defeated the Dutch abandoned Indonesia, and Indonesia didn't have, people of Indonesia, Indonesian didn't have any weapon, to struggle against the Japanese. But in other hand, people of Indonesia also think, why I should fought against the Japanese? They liberate us from the Dutch. But in Indonesian language, we have a very nice saying. It's like free from the crocodile mouth and enter the tiger mouth, right? So actually, it is a very complicated history to learn, of course. But under Japanese era, we have the dark page, and then also we have the Not, I would not say it's a positive, but it's based on historical fact that Japan give us opportunity to use Indonesian language. Of course, we live under fascism. That is the thing we don't like. And after Indonesia gained its independence, and then the Japanese was defeated by the Allied forces, many of Japanese also joined with our independence army against the Dutch recolonization. Dutch at least launched 2 attacks to Indonesia. First in 1947. The first military aggression to recolonization Indonesia, and then the second military action was in 1948. So many of the Japanese joined us against the Dutch. So that the history will always be a complex thing to understand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like in China, we teach about the Japanese aggression against
I know about the
Chinese people.
Nanking, for instance.
Yeah, that's saying the 8 years of fighting the Japanese, and so most people in China, I can say that they don't really like the Japanese people or the Japan as a country. So it's a way of education. Since early times, the children would hate Japanese. That will create a problem between the civil societies in the future. So, what's the right way of remembering the colonialism times and seeing the future?
Yeah, maybe we have a slightly different perspective on how we see colonialism. For instance, 3 years ago when I was involved in a project of the exhibition in the Rijksmuseum, it's called a Revolutie. It was about the Indonesian independence exhibition. I wrote an article about the revolution in Indonesia, that many of the victims were coming from the Dutch side, even the mixed Eurasian people who has been live here in Indonesia from many years before, even from the early of Dutch colonization. I mean, their descendants already live here as a Indo people, a mixture people. And then when I wrote about this, there was a very violence period in Indonesian Revolution, and the victim coming from these people, and they remember this period 1945 until 1946, 7 as a bersiap or get ready, bersiap period, because they always hear Indonesians shouting bersiap, bersiap. I mean, get ready, get ready. The Dutch will attack us. We better for us to get ready against the Dutch recolonization, and it's become a traumatic era for the Indo people, from the Eurasian people. But I saw the terminology, the term bersiap is very loaded. It's full of concept. It's all about the traumatic period of the Eurasian people in Indonesia. It's also about how people would remember this violent period. But I feel there is a tendency of racism in this term. So I decided to write an article about it. And a group of people report me to the police station. They accuse me of being spreading the hatred against this minority, Eurasian people, the descendant of people who has been live in Indonesia before the war, before Indonesia gained its independence. And then I was like, they report me file to the police station. I almost get in jail in the Netherlands. This gives me this indicate how people in Netherlands would react to Indonesian history, especially in the revolution time. We remember this period as a glory, as a glory period, because at the end of the day we finally gain our independence. We liberate ourselves from the Dutch, from the Japanese, from many colonizators, especially from Dutch colonization. Finally, we become the winner of history, the champion. Meanwhile, people in the Netherlands, some of them who had a traumatic era, live under, revolution time in 1945 until 1950, they would remember it as a traumatic and become, so to speak, people who get not really nice experience live in Indonesia. They would see, for instance, in Indonesia, every 17th of August, we celebrate our Independence Day. Meanwhile, people in the Netherlands who, experience a very traumatic period in Indonesia would recall it as a traumatic period. So this is two sides of remembering the history, especially in a certain period of our history. So, if you ask me how Indonesian people would, see the Dutch, sometimes people in village always see them still as a colonizer by mocking them as Belanda, or penjajah means colonizer. But now the young generation, they have their own perspective, right? Of course, we still have the old building that built in colonial era. If you go to old city of Batavia or old city of Jakarta, you can still see people riding the bicycle, wearing the uniform from colonial time. That's the way they not appreciate the colonialism, but that's the way they appreciate the history. And the history of the Dutch colonialism is our part history. And the way they recall, the way they, commemorate, the colonization by wearing the Dutch uniform, not to become, admirer of Dutch colonization, no. But that's the way young generation see the Dutch colonization. Yeah, I think they already make a peace. Yeah, but also they learn that the Dutch colonialism in Indonesia has impact to our life today. In 1950s, there was a publication, there was a brochure, written by Aidit. Aidit is an Indonesian Communist Party chairman. He wrote that Indonesia actually, in 1950s, Indonesia actually half colonized and half feudalized country. So still half. So if you count from 1945 up to today, today we would like to, we will celebrate our 80 years anniversary of our independence this year, which is actually not long ago. My mother was born in 1947. She's a children of revolution. And it's only one generation. So, as a historian, I always feel that we still have a kind of influence from colonial time. The way the government, the way the bureaucracy running their business, sometimes, the influence of feudalism, respecting the superior too much, right? Even, I believe, now in Indonesian media social, many Indonesian netizens problematize some of the higher officer using the patrol, the police car to guard them, right? I think this is also the influence of the late feudalism, the old feudalism. Why? Because under colonial, when the Dutch want to maintain or entertain this local elite, the bupati, for instance, if they want to visit their relative or family, they would bring a lot of bodyguard, a lot of people, and it's still we can still feel that air, we can still feel that influence up today. So for me, it is evident that actually we haven't freed ourselves at all from the influence of the past, especially the feudalism and the colony.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
But the interesting part about you said is in the Batavia city,
Yeah,
in
the
old
old
town,
city
there
of
are-
Jakarta.
Yeah, there are people wearing the uniform, the Dutch
Yeah.
people's
Yeah.
uniform. That can never happen in China. People in China cannot wear a Japanese.
Of course, of course. That also never happened in Europe. You cannot wear a Nazi or SS uniform, or people will beat you.
No, I mean the modern Japanese uniform, like a cartoon or the national uniform of the Japanese, the typical women's,
Yeah,
female. Yeah. That cannot happen in
Yeah, maybe
China.
maybe in China was not colonized by one a nation for such a long time.
Yeah.
Maybe, right?
Yeah.
That's a different story with Indonesia. We were colonized by one nation, the Dutch, for a long, long time. So the influence is still there, still here. Yeah.
I like history, so I often go to the bookstores to find interesting history books, but I cannot find any
What about history? Indonesian history?
Indonesia history. So if you
My recommendation?
you can recommend some books.
But I would recommend you to read a book about the Indonesian internationalist activism. The book written by Dutch historian Klaas Stutje, he is a good friend of mine, which is now translated to Indonesian language, but the original version of the book, of course, published in English. That's the first book. And then the second is a book written by David van Rijbroek. David van Rijbroek is a Belgian historian. He is a very famous historian. He wrote the book about Indonesian Revolution, the birth of the modern world. So this book about how Indonesia struggled against the Dutch colonization and how Indonesia become the inspirator as well as the organizer of the Bandung Conference, which was promote colonized country to free themselves with help of Asian African countries. That's the book, the David van Rijbroek. Yeah.
Okay, I will find those two books. And I have one final question about Indonesia. Why the country is called Indonesia?
Well, actually, it's an anthropological findings, so to speak. It was found by two anthropologists from England, the British anthropologists, and also one of them German, I think. G.R. Logan. He wrote an article, scientific article, about the people who live in the islands, and the people who live in this island got influence from Indian. So Indonesos, he wrote these people as Indonesos, and it became more political when maybe in the early of 20th century, 1912, 1913, student activists at the time, especially Suwardi Suryaningrat, he is a political activist and also one of our founding father. He used the word of Indonesia to identify himself and his people, instead of using the Indians, because it is what you call like we have several pages of history about our name. First, the Dutch call us as inlanders, because based on the social social segregation based on race, the indigenous people would stay in the lower class of colony. The first was the Westerner, the European. The second class, in the middle, the foreign East, like a Chinese, Indian, Arabs, yeah. And then the lower class is the indigenous people, or the Dutch call as inlanders. That are very very make a people low, lower.
Implies.
Yeah, it's yeah, and people, student activists who already has a new awareness about their identity, they would not call themselves as inlanders, because it's like calling slaves, inlanders. It's more it's more pejorative. Yeah, derogatory name, things like that, right? So it makes you lower than people above you. So people, student activists and then many activist leader at that time in the early 20th century start to call them as the Indians, or people who live in Dutch East India. Dutch East Indies, the Indians, or people from Dutch East Indies. But then that didn't mean that the people feel like they have their own identity as a nation. And since 1913, Suwardi Suryaningrat used Indonesische Pers Bureau, or Indonesian Pers Agency in the Netherlands when he was exiled by the Dutch East Indies government in Indonesia, right, to the Netherlands as an exile. And he founded a news agency, and he used Indonesia as the name of his office. And then later on in 1922, there was a student organization. They used Indonesia as the name of the organization, Perhimpunan Indonesia, or Indonesian Association. It replaced the name before because they use Indische Vereniging, or the people of Dutch East Indies organization. So from that moment on, started in 1922, the name of Indonesia become more popular, replacing inlanders, or the indigenous people, or the Indians, as I explained you before. And then in 1920s, 1922, there was also Indonesian Communist Party. And in 1927, Sukarno founded Indonesian Nationalist Party. And in 1928, when youth activists were gathered in Jakarta, in Batavia, they organized a conference. They have youth oath, and they declare that we are Indonesian. We have our own language, Indonesian language. And that when the identity become more materialize as Indonesian. Yeah.
Well, that's a fantastic story. Jakarta, what does Jakarta mean? I heard that Jakarta is derived from Indian language.
Jakarta derived from the name of the Prince Jayakarta.
Jayakarta.
Prince Jayakarta. So the city named after him.
Oh.
Jayakarta to Jakarta. I don't know when the transliteration was happened, but yeah, Jakarta derived from the name of a Prince Jayakarta, and the place in the north Jakarta was named after him. Pelabuhan Jayakarta, the port of Jayakarta, of course the Sunda Kelapa there, the old port of Batavia.
Oh.
So Jakarta, the city was named after him. It's all name of Jakarta. Under Dutch colonization, the city was called as Batavia.
Is there a legendary story, like a fairy tale, like in China there is stories like the Huangdi, Yandi, Nuwa, something like that. Is there stories like that in Indonesia? Like who created before religion, who created the world?
Well, the Indonesian people consist of many religion and then also traditional custom, and they have their own version of how the land created. Well, you will found what you call it, the story, different story. For instance, Japanese people will have their own story of how they exist in this world. Meanwhile, people from North Sumatra, the Batak also, they believe that their ancestors come directly from God.
You are Javanese.
I'm Bantenese.
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 What's
Not
Bantenese?
Bantenese.
Banten.
People from Banten.
Banten.
Yeah, Banten is actually normally part of West Java, but since 2001 become a new province.
Many Chinese people live there.
In Banten, yes, of course, in my hometown, in Rangkas Bitung also.
Chinese. What's your version of? What's Banten's version of how the world?
Have you ever been visiting the site of Sultanate Banten?
No.
You can find the kelenteng. What is kelenteng? What is it's like the temple, a Chinese temple in historical site of Sultanate of Banten. So it proves that actually people of Banten already has been connected to Chinese people way long time ago, and the designer, the architect of the mosque minaret, he came from China, Chinese, Czech Bancut.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the style of the minaret is a bit Chinese. That's in the mosque.